Kia ora, coming to you from Nelson, New Zealand. Thank you for being here on our Star Kittens Media channel. Today we are discussing the new moon in Cancer. The moon is in her home sign. It is occurring on August 4th at 11:13 p.m. here in New Zealand. Or for those watching in the United States, it is 7:13 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Of course, we are deep diving into the moon and her beautiful energies, making a conjunction with Vesta. And we're also discussing Ophiuchus because Icarus has just moved into that sign. Lots to talk about, beautiful feminine energies. Let us know your takeaway message today. Welcome to Star Kittens Media, where we discuss 13th sign astrology. My name is Sana, and of course, I am joined by David. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So we are already in August. I don't know how that happened. And today we are discussing the new moon in Cancer. What are the overall themes today?
Well, before we kick off into that, firstly, welcome to our new subscribers and listeners. We appreciate you, and we appreciate all the support that we get from all around the world. So, kicking on with this one, Cancer, new moon. The combination of energies, including Ophiuchus, Icarus is an Ophiuchus, and the asteroid Vesta is conjunct to the new moon, brings a lot of divine, feminine, mystical, magical, and mysterious energy forward. So there are some very high frequency energies that will be best accessed when we tap our intuition. Drop into our heart space, be open to third eye surprises. Of course, anytime there's a new moon, we're talking about beginnings and intention, inspiration, positive action, and stepping forward. This is an emotional lunation. It's going to be deeply felt through our DNA, through our genetic imprints in our soul. We're talking here about subconscious energies. They're indistinct, they can be powerful, they can be uneasy, they may be uncomfortable, but at the same time, these energies, these subconscious energies rising could also be blissful and easy. It all depends on how you see it and the perception that you have and your mindset. Of course, the moon, a new moon, but particularly this one in her home sign of Cancer, is very much about, obviously, water. And that water could be anything. I mean, there's so many expressions of water, right? There's controlled water coming out of a tap, and you have a trickle in a creek, and you have raging waterfalls, and you have the sea and everything in between. So using that as a metaphor, the water flow for us and how we experience and express this new moon could be anything from the trickle of the creek to the strong river experience to even an overwhelming experience, as in, say, riptides in the ocean. So the best way to navigate and to move through this new moon is by accessing our emotional intelligence, our creativity, our right brain faculties, our psychic and extrasensory capabilities, if you've got those, or if you're wanting to open yourself to those experiences. And of course, the focus primarily is the yin energies of receptivity and willingness to be open to experiences. But of course, with the sun and moon are conjunct at a new moon, there's also, don't forget about the yang energies of taking that sort of right brain inspiration and then applying it to action. a little caution, I guess, is to watch impulsiveness given the deep emotional currents that are flowing in and around us. Be patient, be willing to observe and to witness. Of course, a new moon is the blending of the sun, masculine, and the moon, feminine, in what we call the union of opposites, as opposed to the full moon that we talked about last time, which is they're sitting directly opposite each other. So this is a time of integration. And we're going to talk a little bit about Vesta. We haven't spent much time talking about the asteroid Vesta and where she fits in the astrological mosaic, but very strong energy, Vesta energy coming through at this lunation. But briefly, the Vesta is about the eternal flame and the unquenchable inner spirit or fire that we all have. Sometimes it may be a little dim, sometimes it could be roaring, or again, anywhere in between, depending on where you're at on your spiritual journey. But of course, that internal flame or fire represented by Vesta represents our connection to source that's always there. And the Icarus trine to Ophiuchus, which we'll talk about as well, is really about stepping into our authentic power, our purpose and our path, and being willing to do that in a way that is almost calculated, a calculated risk.
Yes, I love talking about Icarus, and I'm very excited to dive more into Vesta today. She has an interesting story, I think, and I think our listeners will agree. But let's start off with the main, or the spotlight for me is the moon being in her home sign of Cancer.
Yeah, really adds to and amplifies this new moon. Of course, we get a new moon in all different signs, but this time it's happening in the home sign of the moon. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the moon tarot because it is filled with symbolism. And I'm looking at the Rider-Waite version, but there's so much going on anytime there's a moon, whether it's full or a new moon in Cancer, that it's worthwhile having a look at this card because I think it sets the scene. The moon tarot has at the very bottom of it the water, and that represents the seas of unconsciousness. And what we see emerging from that water is a crayfish or lobster, same name depending on where you are in the world, emerging from the water, which represents or symbolizes the first emergence from the unconscious state into the first signs of awareness. So we become aware and awake. That process is it's not a linear binary, it happens here and doesn't happen there, but it's an emergence process, and that's represented by that crayfish or lobster emerging from that seas of unconsciousness or the waters of unconsciousness. That's at the bottom of the card. And then there's a clear pathway. It is a rugged pathway. It has its twists and turns, but it goes all the way up into the mountains. And that really represents the pathway of the unconscious to the consciousness. And of course, above the card or central to the card is the sun-moon integration representing higher consciousness. In that card, we see a dog, which represents the taming of our instincts or those instincts to fly off the handle, if you like, or the taming of our mind. Our minds can run away on us. So the dog represents that taming of the mind and the instincts, the application of the intellect and critical thinking in the path of awakening. And the wolf is the other side, represents the wild and untamed nature, where we may be cast to the wolves if we don't seek to tame our instincts and our intellect. And we can be like the wolf, howling at the moon and cast around in the wilderness. So there's two very strong representations there of the process of awakening and consciousness unfolding, involving both the dog and the wolf. The pillars in the card represent duality and polarity, the boundedness of our rationality. There's sort of the bounds of our experience. And the card itself pulls through ideas of divination. On the one hand, it can talk about hidden dangers and deception and really dark forces, and the projection of our fears and anxieties based on our soul memories. We talk about the moon as the repository of the soul. And, you know, physically, this is sitting in that sort of gut region, and where a lot of our emotions emerge from. Often people will talk about, I feel it in my stomach, or I feel it in my gut. And the soul memories can come through physically through there, but also through our minds. So often these soul memories contain impressions from the past, both the current timeline and any other timelines that we've experienced as a soul. We believe here at Star Kittens that we have had multiple experiences on this planet, some of us and many of us, in fact, and that we are spirit having a divine human experience. So therefore we have memories of other timelines, of other dimensions, of other experiences, and they can come through under a moon experience. So the moon can also represent emotional repression, and going back to that feeling of the gut, where we ignore those subtle signals, those insights, those intuitions, that can be either positive or negative. They can be warning us to not do something, or they can be giving us a kind of a push to do something, and we'll touch a little bit more about that with Icarus. And of course, under a new moon in Cancer, events can manifest in our lives, can appear, that are tied to unresolved issues of the past, and they will very often come through family members and through ancestral memories. We were talking about this the other day, that one of the most popular things to do for humans at the moment is look into their ancestry and their lineage, and this is very much a Cancer energy. And it can throw up some shocks and some surprises, good and bad. So this is that moon energy as well. Of course, the overall message of a new moon in Cancer, with the influence of Ophiuchus and Icarus, which we'll talk about, and Vesta as well, is that these emotional blockages or traumas that we have, that we're carrying in our gut often, and that we're carrying in our memories and in our bodies, they can be resolved, they can be remediated, but we're going to need to be courageous in confronting them. And before we can release some of these unconscious biases and issues and karmic loops, like the lobster or the crayfish emerging from the subconscious, we need to be willing to confront these memories in a positive way. And it is only when we do so that we can begin to evolve and progress, and we can walk up that path that you can see in the Moon Tarot card, unhindered.
Yes, and I think for me, it's always been the recognition. If you recognize that you have a particular pattern in your life, or always behave a certain way, the first step to me is actually recognizing that. And then very important is forgiveness, if you feel bad about that particular behavior, and then moving on from there. But if you don't recognize your bad traits for whatever reason, then we can't do anything about it, right? We need to actually look in that mirror, how uncomfortable as it is. So the moon conjunction with Vesta, please tell us more.
Like Vulcanus in our last reading, often just the way that the planetary bodies are scattered at any time, with full moons and new moons and eclipses and so on. We don't often get to talk about some of these asteroids like Vulcanus, like Vesta, but today we do, and I'm really excited to bring forward some insights about this, both from a historical perspective and mythological perspective, but obviously in terms of the astrological symbolism as well. Vesta, for those who want to look into this a little further, is or was the Roman goddess of hearth and home. Hestia in the Greek version of history. The etymology or the roots of the word hearth, that's H-E-A-R-T-H, are West Germanic and Old English. And of course, you and I, Sana, were talking about there's quite a Dutch influence here with the word as well. But hearth means fireplace, or the part of the floor on which a fire is made. And a burning place. In the Norse, they called the hearth fire as well. Hearth was central to home and family as a place of communion and gathering in the Roman history. And to do this justice, as I did last week, I'm going to read a little and then provide some thoughts as well. Vesta was the virgin goddess of the hearth, the home and family in the Roman pantheon. In this context, virgin is a metaphor for purity, wholesomeness, and virtue. Vesta was rarely depicted in human form. Most often, she was represented by the fire of her temple in the Forum Romanum, which was located in Rome's city centre. For centuries, the Forum was the centre of day-to-day life in Rome, the site of triumphal processions and elections, the venue for public speeches, criminal trials, and gladiatorial matches. It was the nucleus of commercial affairs. Here, statues and monuments commemorated the city's leaders. The heart of ancient Rome has been called the most celebrated meeting place in the world as it stood at that time. Today, the Forum is a sprawling ruin of architectural fragments and intermittent archaeological excavations that attract around 4.5 million sightseers a year. Some of you watching this may have been there. For Vesta's temple to be located here speaks of how she, as a deity and energy, was regarded by the Romans of antiquity. Entry to Vesta's temple was permitted only to her priestesses, the Vestal Virgins, or Vestas. As Vesta was considered a guardian of the Roman people, her festival, the Vestalia, was regarded as one of the most important Roman holidays. The myths depicting Vesta and her priestesses are few. The most notable of them, however, are tales of Immaculate Conception. In some Roman traditions, Rome's founders, Romulus and Remus, and the king Servius Tullius were conceived in this way. Vesta was among the Deconcentus, 12 of the most honored deities in the Roman pantheon. Vesta was the daughter of Saturn and Opus, which is Latin for fertility, and she is the sister of Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, Juno, and Ceres. Concerning the status of Vesta's hearth, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, a Greek historian, said that fire is sacred to Vesta because that goddess, occupying the central position in the universe, regenerates the celestial fires. Ovid, a Roman poet, agreed, saying Vesta is synonymous with the earth as both possess everlasting fire. The sacred flames of the hearth were believed to be indispensable for the preservation and continuity of humanity, while the purity of the flames symbolizes the vital force that is the root of our existence. Vesta is the place in our astrological personal mosaic where we can be dedicated in meditation and mindfulness and the pursuit of awakening to our true potential, provided we overcome the distraction of the underlying energies of the house in which it is placed. Put another way, if Vesta is in your first house, distraction from the practice of meditation and mindfulness, whatever that means for you, will be linked to low self-esteem and negative self-image. That becomes the battleground for you, the polarity principle in play, where you become lost in blame, shame, and gaslighting others, rather than the positive approach, which is introspection and self-reflection as a pathway to awakening. If Vesta is in the second house, we can become distracted by the pursuit of material resources, money, and possessions. Again, the polarity principle here is that we must overcome these desires to find our inner fire, ignite our passion, and reveal our true purpose for this life. If Vesta is in the third house, the distraction is found in our struggles to communicate clearly, which erodes our confidence. This eats away at us, so we spend less time focusing on practice, meditation and mindfulness, spiritual development and expansion, and more time on battling our mental, emotional, and physical demons. I won't go into every placement of Vesta in the houses, but I think you get the point. If you want to know more, of course, hit us up for a chart. The message of Vesta is that we must protect our inner fire, our connection to source, the universal consciousness or intelligence, or whatever name you assign to the great I am. We foster and develop spiritual awakening through regular practice, through patience and regard for the still, quiet voice within us that guides us through intuition, through incredible synchronicities and delicious serendipity. Vesta's message, therefore, is to go inwards at this new moon, to drop into your heart space and to listen. Just listen.
Yeah. And I'll just reiterate the sentence you said before, that we believe we are a spiritual being having a divine human experience, and that source, there's a fractal of source in all of us. And I've recently been listening to a beautiful book, and the author is talking about when you observe something that is so beautiful, whether it is a honeybee landing on a flower, or in springtime when the blossom is opening, or a sunset, or whatever, that you look at that and you let source through your eyes observe that beauty. And I've done that, and my children do it as well. And for me, it's that total feeling of bliss just comes over me. It's that innocence of a child in that moment. And I think for me, that's also where Vesta energy is that inner flame within us, to really just let that be and be present in that one moment. So thank you so much for sharing that beautiful wisdom. Next up, we're staying with beautiful divine feminine energies, because Icarus has just moved into Ophiuchus and is making a trine with this new moon. So how does those energies fit into the picture we are describing today?
Yeah, and before going there, I'll just quickly recap based on what you've just said. It's difficult to have those blissful, innocent, Vesta-like experiences where we tap into our inner fire, our inner intuition, our inner hearth, the home of source within us, if we are distracted. And that's the secret of the placement of Vesta in the chart, is you have to, when I talk about the polarity principle, you've got to go to the other side and say, well, if it's in XYZ house, what are the human experiences that are consuming me to the extent that I'm unable to actually access that, or willing to even experience that inner fire, that inner flame. So that's the key. And as I mentioned before, if you really want to know a little more about that, let us know, and we will provide a chart for you. So yeah, building on the incredible energies of the moon, the feminine energies of the moon, of course, in Cancer, the energies of Vesta, which we've just talked about, is now Ophiuchus. And Ophiuchus is, I just love talking about her, obviously. She is one of the most misunderstood aspects of astrology. And for those followers of 12 sign, they miss the magic of this because Icarus is not an Ophiuchus. Icarus will be somewhere else. In fact, they won't even be touching on some of this that I'm about to talk about and why this is so exciting. And for those who are, again, unaware of where your Ophiuchian energy most comes through in the chart, everyone has an Ophiuchus house. For me, it is my moon. My moon is an Ophiuchus. So I'm very very attuned to what's happening just at the moment with this. So the new moon trine to Icarus and Ophiuchus, a few notes that I've made here. Icarus, we've talked about before, but it's such a cool myth. It's such a cool story because just briefly, Icarus and his father were imprisoned at the top of a mountain, and they needed to escape, or they wanted to escape. And as these stories go, they may be literal, or they may have a mix of what actually happened and a little bit of just poetic license. They fashioned wings from bird feathers and wax. You mentioned bees before. So they created these wings and audaciously leapt from the window of this prison. Of course, the guards didn't think that this was possible. So because the prison was located at the top of a sheer cliff face, and down below is the Icarian Sea, which is in the Mediterranean. So that's where part of this mythology and legend comes from. And Dad said to the son, don't fly too close to the sun, because otherwise, the way that we've constructed these wings is that your wings will melt and you will plunge to your demise. And the rest is history. Dad descended and landed safely, and the son went up and got caught up in the reverie and the bliss of flying and the unencumbrance of not being attached to the earth. And of course, the sun melted his wings and he plunged to his demise. And that name of the Icarian Sea is named after this story. So the moral of the story is to take calculated risks. And Icarus is where we experience, therefore, the risk-reward continuum. And any of those ideas, a lot of us will understand that. Sometimes you've got to take a risk to get a reward. Sometimes you get a reward because you took a risk. But he flew too close to the sun, and so part of this is he didn't listen to advice. He didn't listen to the wisdom of others and elders. So there's a nature of headstrong and rebelliousness with Icarian energy. At the same time, it could also be, as the story is told, the pathway to freedom of expression, the way to escape from the prisons of our mind or the prisons of our emotions, the dark corners of our lives, the emotional baggage. These are all metaphors for escape. And where Icarus talks about the unencumbrance from burdens, be they perceived or real, Ophiuchus energy, which is where Icarus has just arrived, is the divine ether. Ophiuchus is quintessence. Ophiuchus is sacred elixir. This is how we unlock our path and our passion. And let me explain a little more about that. Ophiuchus, as we interpret her, represents integration. And she is the secret ingredient that we can add metaphorically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually to any situation or scenario to turn it around. So Ophiuchus is part of the path of karmic resolution, This is where on our journey, if we go back to the moon card and we've emerged from the seas of unconsciousness, and unconsciousness represents that which we don't know, ignorance, and we're moving towards awareness and enlightenment and awakening and full integration of both sides of our nature, the masculine and the feminine. Ophiuchus is part of that process. And therefore, the Ophiuchian energy is part of karmic resolution. The Philosopher's Stone, which is a story for those who follow those kind of ancient, the Game of Thrones and various other stories talk about the Philosopher's Stone. Well, the Philosopher's Stone is the end of that pathway. That is the point at which we are integrated and we are complete. And Ophiuchus certainly plays a part in that process. Ophiuchus is represented by the number 13. And in the astrological mosaic, the reason that a lot of astrologers struggle with the Ophiuchian energy is because of the 13th sign. In the 12th sign, everything has its opposite. If we look at Aries, the opposite is Libra, the 1 and the 7. If we look at Taurus, the opposite is Scorpio, the 2 and the 8. If we look at Gemini, the opposite is Sagittarius, the 3 and the 9. If we look at Cancer, the opposite energy is Capricorn, the 4 and the 10. For Leo, it's obviously 5 and 11 is Aquarius, and the final part of that 12 sign system is the 6 and the 12, which is Virgo and Pisces. And when astrologers are talking about the polarity principle and finding the middle path, they're often referencing, if you're a Cancer, look to the opposite side of Capricorn and try to blend the two energies. If you're a Gemini, look to the opposite side of Sagittarius and you blend the two energies. Yet with Ophiuchus as the 13th sign, there is no opposite, and that's part of the secret and the frustration for many astrologers. But because she has no opposite, no polarity, Ophiuchus energy is therefore complete and whole in and of herself, and that is part of the secret. She is the mother of creation, without which there is no life. Many biased stories and texts talk about the masculine principle of creation, but we all know that there is no creation without the feminine. This is why she's been removed, not only from the astrological system, but also from many historical texts and references and stories. In the Bible, Ophiuchus is represented or talked about as Sophia, the female personification of wisdom, found there in those sacred writings, especially in the Old Testament, but also in the Kabbalah, an equally old version of history. Ophiuchus is symbolized by the serpent rising up the spine, connecting, for those who believe in the chakra system, the root chakra to the crown. Of course, we go back to the moon card. That is the beginning of the process where we emerge from the unconsciousness, the instincts for survival, and we experience through that pathway a process where we get to enlightenment. Well, it's symbolized by the serpent rising up the spine, connecting the root to the crown. This process of Kundalini arising, actually, many are unaware that the spine has 33, it's an interesting number, isn't it? 33 chambers of the spinal column or vertebrae, and the Kundalini arising actually integrates all of those, bringing them all together into a consolidated whole. And that's why I refer to Ophiuchus as integration. Ophiuchus is the energy of unification, of consolidation, of merging. Ophiuchus' name, here's an interesting little story as well, was changed to Asclepius, the father of medicine. And we can see the caduceus symbol is two snakes winding up a staff. Well, the staff represents the spine, and the wings at the top of the caduceus represent enlightenment or quintessence or freedom. And of course, the caduceus is the symbol in many nations around the world of the medical fraternity. So the changing of Ophiuchus, originally the mother of healing and the mother of all integrative medicines and approaches, has been deliberately changed, and the entire mythology has been messed with. In another very interesting aspect of Ophiuchus is that she is known in the astrological chart of each of those planetary bodies I talked about before. They all have an element assigned to them. So Aries, fire; Taurus, earth; Cancer, water; Gemini, air. So we have air, fire, earth, water. And yet, what is Ophiuchus? Well, Ophiuchus is the fifth element of ether, aether. And for those who want to go and look, ether is in the theory of physics and quantum physics, especially, the theory of the existence of a field through which electromagnetism transmits. For those who understand a little about the theories or the ideas of physical manifestation, it requires a combination of electromagnetism. We see that obviously with batteries. You see the positive and the negative, but the electromagnetism is part of the secret to how physical manifestation actually happens, and it transmits through these waves, transmit through the ether, which is the field. And physics recognize ether as that field. Astrologers recognize ether as the 13th sign and the 5th element. So Ophiuchus, again, just like I did with Vesta, I'll give just a reflection of how integration of Ophiuchus energy works in some of the houses, just a little sprinkling. If you want to know more, let us know and we'll give you a chart. Ophiuchus in the first house can be added to your experience of self-esteem, personality development, and integration of experiences into wisdom, smarts, and mastery. Ophiuchus in the second house amplifies your experience of material accumulation, of money, of wealth, of creation and wealth creation and resource management. So it adds a very elevated view, a very smart way to do that. Ophiuchus in the third house enhances our communication skills, our writing, our oral presentations, our data collection. This is the house of Gemini. Our memory recall, our critical thinking, our formulation of ideas and concepts. So the message of Ophiuchus and Icarus together is to get outside your comfort zone in a calculated way. Be willing to step into the unknown. Trust the universe. She has your back.
Yes. We are, again, the book I've been reading, it's about really opening up the channeled messages that your higher self or your soul has for you. And when someone is not sure if what the message they've received is truly from your higher self, you just have to think about how you normally talk about yourself. Oh, I should have done that. I need to tidy this. Oh, that wasn't good enough. You're not beautiful. You're very degrading of you as a being. Whereas if you are connected to your higher self, which is source, there is never judgment. It is, you are here just at the right time, at the right moment, doing the thing that you need to do right now. And you are beautiful and you are loved and you are all that you can be. And so it's that negative voice that so often has the overbearing weight on our day-to-day being. And by tapping into the loving energy that is all around us, we will be able to spread more and more of that higher vibe. And we do affect everything around us. You've given us so many beautiful insights today. Not many people even if they are looking and recognizing the 13th sign of Ophiuchus, we'll be talking about the things that we spoke about today. So thank you so much for sharing all the things that you have learned over the years of studying this beautiful subject. How would you like to sum that all together and share your final thoughts?
My personal experience of Ophiuchus is profound. She sits in my 7th house, and the house that we call contracts and commitments, serious relationships, be they professional or platonic, which involve, typically business, marriage, mortgages, that sort of thing. Anytime there's 7th house contracts and commitments, for me, the Ophiuchian energy comes through, and also obviously in the way that I look at the Libra energies of the middle path. And I have found that Ophiuchus really brings a level of, especially through the moon, a level of heightened intuition. Some people have a sun in Ophiuchus or a Saturn in Ophiuchus, but I'm talking about the moon. It brings for me an incredible heightened intuition and access to perspectives that sometimes can just arrive out of nowhere. And they will often come when I'm in that Vesta state of mindfulness and meditation, when I'm just listening. So there's just a part of how I deal with and integrate the Ophiuchian energy. And she is incredible. And obviously we all of us on this planet have some Ophiuchus energy to bring through and express. With that said, just as some final thoughts here, I started with the idea that there was a lot of divine feminine, mystical, magical, and mysterious energy, and we've touched on why that is. The moon itself in her home sign of Cancer. Then you add the conjunction with Vesta, the inner fire, and then you add the trine to Icarus in Ophiuchus. There's a lot of really powerful energy, really beautiful energy. The moon card itself, which I touched on, is the wolf or dog, and that represents the taming of the mind and of our emotions, and that's very important in the path of awakening. We can be, when we start to dive into soul memories and do past life regressions and dream walking, and there's so many techniques that we can access interdimensional memories and consciousness. It can be overwhelming, and that's part of the key of the metaphor, the symbols of the dog and the wolf, is be careful if you're doing this, because you have to have your mind under control. Otherwise you can be given to flights of fancy, and it can be like being swept away. The water can be your friend, but it can also be an enemy. Soul memories that may emerge and come through at this time, it might be hard to put your finger on them, but go with the feeling and just listen, tap it out, release it if it needs to be released. The overarching theme here is of water, and therefore it's emotional, and we can be swept away, or we can be buoyant, we can be floating and flowing, or we can be submerged. It's up to you. I have an expression, and you've heard me say this before, Sana, is that when it comes to water, especially when we're in times of transition or change, look at the tides, not the waves, because it's the underlying current. Is it coming in or is it going out? The waves on the top might be choppy because of the cross currents, but at the end of the day, the current will move strongly in one direction and then strongly in another. So there's maybe a little message here, is watch the tides, not the waves. Go inwards and listen. That's the mindfulness and meditation, which actually means simply to focus. That's all it is. It's focus. And the process under which you focus is entirely personal. It doesn't mean sitting for hours in the Buddha position. If you want to do that, of course, go for it. But it doesn't mean that, especially in the West and our busy lives, and in the East where there's lots going on as well. But find what it is for you. It may be taking 5 minutes, as you said before, to look at a bee pollinating a flower, or to look at the rising of the sun, or to just marvel at how a garden grows. I mean, it's up to you. So meditation and mindfulness is a key message. Be open at this time to messages from beyond. They might come through dreams. They may come through deja vu, synchronicities, serendipities, visions, memories, reverie. Dancing sometimes unlocks these kind of blissful moments as well, where you can traverse timelines and understand that actually there's a time-space continuum, but there's a lot more going on outside of that, and that's that whole idea of ether. There's a whole field, there's a whole reality that exists beyond what we can touch and see and taste. And at this time, there's an emergence of really high-frequency energies coming through on Ophiuchus. And Ophiuchus, as I've mentioned before, she has no opposite. She is mother's wisdom. She is the mother of creation. So therefore, she is unlimited and she is omnipotent. And finally, integration is the key word. And integration means to become whole, to restore and regenerate, to activate our lost knowledge and skills. And if you want to know those two areas where perhaps firstly you're getting distracted from mindfulness and meditation, have a look at where Vesta is in your chart. That's where you're most prone to get swept into the opposite direction, away from your truth and away from your inner fire. And if you want to understand, excuse me, a little more about how to unlock your pathway and your immense creativity, have a look at where Ophiuchus is situated in your chart, or what planets are in Ophiuchus as well, because in there you have access to, should you meditate and focus on it and draw upon and call upon these energies, incredible wisdom that just goes beyond anything you can imagine. So with that, I'll wrap it up.
Thank you so much. Yes, as David said, we offer 2-hour natal readings recorded via Zoom, or if you live near us, we can meet you in person and spend some quality time together. You can book that using the links below. We also do a short document with the placements of the main planetary bodies in the chart you can also purchase. I am so grateful that more and more people have found their way here. If this message resonates with you, please share it far and wide. It is time that Ophiuchus becomes a common name for everyone, and that we step into our true divine design for this lifetime. So thank you for spending time with us, and let us know what your main takeaway message was today.
Namaste.